Jay,
Yes, Kory,
welcome.
thank you.
How are
Appreciate
you?
you having me. I'm doing very well. How about you?
Good. It's good to have you here. I see you look really closely over your right shoulder. I see Brutus back.
Brutus is there. There's miscellaneous other Ohio State stuff in the office. So, yeah, got to make sure we represent regularly.
Oh, it's good. Love to hear it. So, Jay, we're going to get into your sort of career arc and story, but if we go back to the beginning, you started out as a chef. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah.
So, what got you into cooking initially, Jay, when you were little?
Sure. So, just very quick background. My dad was, to be honest, difficult and had a lot of expectations. And he was in World War II, and he was a successful boat racer, among many other things. So he had a lot of expectations. So he wanted to make sure that his only son had work ethic. So, along about 10 years old, I had to start going to work. It started on Saturday mornings very early, making me get up, load the truck, and go to a flea market. And I had to sit there and sell whatever it was he wanted to sell that week. The good news is I got to keep the money, but the bad news was it was Saturday morning at like 5:30 or 6, and when you're 10 or 11 years old, that's not what's on your mind. Long story short, he was pushing me to find something that I wanted to do, and so I actually got a job in a restaurant. So I grew up in the Florida Keys, Big Pine Key, Florida, actually. And, we did a lot of fishing, a lot of boat activities and athletics in school and all that stuff. But on the island, there was a pretty famous place called Peg Legs Restaurant. Matter of fact, if you've ever seen the movie Key West, Peg Legs and that whole resort was part of that movie. So there was a couple, Ron and Pat Dudas, that owned and was operating the place. I went in and they hired me on the spot to be a dishwasher, and I quickly found out how terrible that was. But the good news is that they noticed quickly that I was eager to learn, and before you know it, I was helping Ron in the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables and kind of being a bit of a food runner for him. Ron put all the menus together, so I kind of started getting all that. I was 14 years old, so that's how I got into restaurants and eventually hotels. And what led me into it was my experience at Peg Legs there in Big Pine. So I had a lot of opportunity at a young age. I started there, like I said, when I was 14. By the time I was 16, I had keys to the kitchen, and Ron was doing what he wanted to do, and that was go out and get the fresh catch for the day and bring it in, and I was running the line. And so that's how I learned the basics of our menu, and I learned the basics of cooking and baking and all that. Pat made all the desserts. She was Ron's wife. So I learned all those things, and that was really the start of it.
So working in a kitchen environment, it has a reputation for being opposite of what your later career would be in hotels. It's an interesting transition that we'll get into, but do you have any good stories about working in a kitchen?
We got a lot of good stories about working in kitchens and some of the people I've worked with. Some of them probably shouldn't talk about today, at least on camera. But this was in the early '80s. The '80s were a different time. A lot more shenanigans happened than people could do today, or you could get away with. If you've ever seen a couple of those movies, what was it called, Waitress or something like that? A lot of that stuff is very, very true. And what I can tell you is, working in the kitchen, everybody thinks it's hard, and the reality is what it really boiled down to was really long hours. It's nothing to work 60 or 80 hours a week. And so at a young age, that's kind of what I learned. So
Yeah. So, Jay, you've been in the hospitality industry your whole career. But within that, I sort of view that you've had three different lives within hospitality. You've had the kitchen, the front of house, and now in the owner's seat. So you're in the Florida Keys, you're working in kitchens. How did you become a chef within a hotel?
Well, once I graduated high school, I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, and hospitality and trouble, that's what you get in the Keys or on fishing boats, which is fun, and had a good time doing some of that. And there's a lot of trouble that you can get into. And so the reality is my mother never really adjusted to the Keys. I was like 5 years old. We still had a lot of family in Michigan and Ohio, the Columbus area, that type of thing. My dad was an Ohio State grad. And so the initial plan was I was going to attend the Ohio State University. And then we were also looking at DeVry, which was a computer science kind of path. I had already been working in kitchens and hospitality, if you want to call it that, or the restaurant side for several years. And I just, quite honestly, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to do something because my dad wouldn't accept anything less. So we ended up moving back to Ohio. And when I got there, I started down the path of going to school for culinary after a bit of time. And I went to work during that same time period. I went to work for a company that was called Florenz Italian Restaurant. Now, Florenz at the time, they had about 18 locations. They were original in Blue Ash, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati. But they went into Lexington, Louisville, Atlanta, and kind of they were trying to grow. And they were a direct competitor to Olive Garden, actually. Now, we did some things different than Olive Garden did. We didn't have the big commissary that they had, and some more of the stuff was a little homemade at each location. But I ended up going to work for those folks, and I was asked to move to Gwinnett County in Atlanta at the Gwinnett Place Mall. They were opening a new location there, and I was asked to go there as the opening back of the house manager and chef, really. Probably not chef. It was more like I was basically the back of the house manager and the lead person in the kitchen. We didn't quote unquote employ a chef. Florenz had a corporate executive chef that kind of put menus together and all that. But I was kind of the guy that was in charge of that. And keep in mind, again, I was still quite young at that point. Again, I had a lot of opportunity at a young age, and so that's really what pushed me into managerial roles and leadership roles in the hospitality business, specifically in the restaurant business there. Now, while I was there a couple years, and there was a guy that was one of the general manager. So the way it was broke out was the back of the house, and then we had a GM, and then 2 or 3 assistants out front. There was a guy named Mark Matthews. Got a job interview with a company that many people in this industry know. It was called Weingarten and Hammonds, or WHI. Again, they were based in Cincinnati. And he got hired, and he went to work for them. And where he went to train was in Syracuse, New York. They had 4 Holiday Inns in Syracuse at the time. They were managing them. And one of these hotels was under a major renovation. It was a typical L-shaped old 2-story Holiday Inn. And they were converting it to a more of a horseshoe and enclosing it, making it a hollow dome, added wing rooms, added a lot of banquet space, improved the kitchen, did all these types of things. And Gary Britton, was the corporate executive chef for Weingarten and Hammonds, and he gave Gary my name, told him what experience we had, and next thing you know, I'm interviewing to be the executive chef at the Holiday Inn, Syracuse, Buckley Road, which was also known as the airport area.
So,
and as luck had it, I fumbled through it enough and knew enough culinary. I had enough culinary experience at that time, and I impressed them with some of the dishes that we put together and all of those types of things. And I got hired. And so,
Jay, do you have a signature dish?
today, I still do quite a bit of cooking. Then a lot of the stuff that we did, again, it was scripted based off of what Gary and his team put together. But, I think I always, because of where I came from in the Keys, I always specialized in seafood, like shrimp and shellfish and shrimp scampi and stuff like that. And believe it or not, I learned, again, at a young age, how to really cook a prime rib the right way. Today, you can't go anywhere and get prime rib the way you're supposed to. It's terrible everywhere you go. Sorry, guys. They're just not cooking it the right way. And so I learned how to do that. But I put a shrimp fra diavolo together during that thing, and I put a chicken cordon bleu wrapped in a puff pastry, actually, together with a white mushroom cream sauce. And again, it was enough to make Gary say, yeah, I think he can do what we want to do here. So I was given that opportunity.
So you were, is executive chef maybe the right role title?
That was my title.
So
What,
executive chef at the Holiday Inn in Syracuse. And how long were you there till? And what I'm getting at is when do you make the transition from, running the kitchen to running
yeah,
the building, so to speak? And it's because it's an interesting transition. Sure, we talked a couple minutes ago how the overarching umbrella of your career is hospitality, but it's one thing for a chef to run a kitchen. It's another thing for that chef to transition over to more of a assistant general manager role, and now you're running the hotel. So if you want to talk about how you made that transition and who
yeah.
sort of pulled you out of the kitchen and gave you the opportunity.
Yeah, sure. So shortly after I arrived in Syracuse, we had to get the hotel was still open and operating, but there was a lot to do. I mean, they were finishing the renovation and the addition and all the extra space and all that. So we had our hands full, and so we did our we could do about 440 people in our banquet space. It was about that size. We hosted the Syracuse men's basketball team the night before home games. We fed them their meals. We had the opportunity to host several football teams that came in and played against Syracuse, things like that. And of course, in those hotels, you always do the big holiday buffets and all of those things. But the reality is that shortly after I got there, the general manager that I was working under was relieved of his duties for one reason or another. They brought in a real, well, I'd like to really say what I thought of him, but kind of a real brash young general manager from UNLV. And now Winder and Hammonds hired a lot of people from different universities, and they definitely had a type. Okay, I mean they were looking for a specific person to be in these roles, and this gentleman's name was Steve Bush, and Steve came in and he had a lot to prove. He was a great person to work with and for at the time. He pushed me and he pushed the rest of the team. But the reality is, he quickly noticed that I was handling everything I had to handle, ran all good numbers, kept everybody in line. Nobody got out of. Food cost was good, labor cost was good. The food was always, as it was supposed to be. But I was always wanting to learn more, and I volunteered for a lot of MOD shifts and things like that. And so Steve and I became friendly. Really, I mean, he recognized that maybe I was going to have a decent career in the back of the house, but maybe my leadership skills and my leadership at such a young age and my work ethic and those types of things might be better served in the front. Or doing something more than just the back of the house. And so, again, like I said, it started with some MOD shifts and learning how to really understand a P&L and helping set budgets and going through ordering processes and helping check rooms and leading some of the weekly executive meetings that we'd have at the hotels and putting agendas together and stuff like that. Okay, learning the front desk. And I was doing all that while I was still in the executive chef role. That was kind of extracurricular stuff for me. And so that was how I was introduced to that. And people took notice, and I was given an opportunity really to, I could have stayed in the culinary path. It would have been fine. Or I was given an opportunity to go into the AGM program. And for those people within Winder and Hammonds or that had worked for WHI, they were known for really turning out really good talent, having an eye for talent and good, hardworking people. They had great training programs, and all of those things were beneficial to me. And some of it was the right place, right time. Some of it was, there wasn't anybody that was going to outwork me. I can tell you that at the time. Now that might not be the case today, but then being young and hungry and wanting to learn and having goals and all of those things, there just wasn't anybody that was going to work any harder than I was going to work and whatever that meant to get the job done. And that got noticed. And like I said, I was given the opportunity to go into the AGM program. And through the AGM program, learned a lot, certainly a lot more. I was fast tracked. And when I was 24 years old, I was handed the keys to a general manager role back at the Holiday Inn Buckley Road. In the meantime, I went as the AGM to Carrier Circle, which was another Holiday Inn, and to the Fairgrounds, which was another Holiday Inn there in Syracuse. And I worked under different people other than Steve. And Steve had an opportunity to move on to something bigger and better. And when that happened, he made the recommendation, and I was given the opportunity to be the GM at the Holiday Inn Buckley Road. And
Wow.
I was 24 and really full of myself and thought I knew everything. And of course, those are hard lessons to learn. But that's really how it happened. So I was basically in the AGM program about 18 months.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you and Steve are still friends to this day.
Very
Um,
much so, yes.
it's amazing that he sort of plucked you out of the kitchen and saw the potential. I mean, have you ever, all these decades later, you ever asked him what he saw in you back then as a young, hungry chef and the that he saw that you could move over to management of running the whole hotel?
Yeah, we've had those conversations. He's about 6 years older than I am. He was one of those guys that was put in positions at a bit of a younger age also. So there was some commonality there. But I think what really drove the fact is at the end of the day, Steve was a hard guy to work for. All right. True story. First day he shows up as GM, we got a notice the night before that we're going to have an all leadership meeting at 6:55 a.m. in the room, and that was quite a bit different from what the people there were used to, and a couple people showed up at a couple minutes after 7, thinking that was okay, and of course they quickly learned that that wasn't going to be acceptable, and we quickly were looking for some new management roles. So that was the kind of guy Steve was. He had a lot of expectations, and he was a hard worker, and he was really good at numbers and a very smart guy. He's very much an idea guy, pretty good sales and marketing guy, but he's all over the place. And I was able to make sense out of some of that. He knew that I respected him and that he could train me and mentor me, and ultimately I was going to do the right thing, and I always had his back. He knew he could always count on something. If he was going to go away for vacation, he wasn't going to have to be bothered. But I think more than anything, I thought he saw the work ethic and the ability to be in a leadership role and take charge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could think a good sign of a leader is recognizing future leaders like he did in yourself. And so as you transition into more of your AGM and then GM role, how was that transition for you from being a chef and running the kitchen to, let's jump to when you become general manager, for the first time and now this is your baby, this is your hotel.
Yeah.
What are some of the lessons that you learned and some of the things that still stick with you today that you now teach your GMs?
Well, so I think there's a lot. First and foremost, what I learned is it's a really big mistake to come in and try to make a lot of changes at one time without really getting the full picture of who, what, when, and where, and why things are done in a certain way. So many managers and young leaders want to come in and they want to make a name for themselves, right? And they want to prove that they're there to do the job. And they just kind of come in like a bull in a china shop almost, right? And that was a lesson that I had to learn. Sometimes you need to just kind of step back, read the room, kind of let things move along the way they've been moving along, and really put a plan in place. We really need to prioritize what you want to do and what's the most important. And obviously, over time, you learn that that's taking care of your people, obviously, but also making sure that you're giving the best guest experience you can give. The other thing that I learned really early on, there's an old adage that says, revenue hides all evils. So, really focused on what's coming in the door is really important, and how you're going to bring more business in. Are you a facilitator, or are you just one that just sits on your hands and thinks everything's going to work out okay, right? I needed to learn that there's an opportunity to learn from everyone, regardless of their skill set and regardless of their time in the business and what their background is. And so listening is one of those things, especially a young man that is full of himself, doesn't listen all the time. And listening is at the top of leadership skills that you have to perfect.
Yeah. And so let's transition, Jay, to the back half of this conversation, which I want to get into Strand. let's talk about, the company. And then I really want to get into your leadership style that you cut your teeth on in the kitchen, sort of groomed and developed as general manager, as you were just alluding to, and where you are today and your leadership philosophies. But so let's skip in the story to when you first joined Strand.
Yeah.
Uh, and why don't you tell us, for those not familiar, what is Strand Hospitality, who is Strand Hospitality, and some stuff about Strand.
Yeah, sure. Okay. We'll lead into Strand very quickly. Along the way between when I left Weingart and Hammonds, worked along the way for some really good companies, Right Investment Properties. They're still active in our business and well respected today. Larry Wright Sr. and Larry Swan at the time. And so worked for them and worked for Prime Hospitality. And I really had the opportunity to get into what I would call the limited feature side of the business at Prime, and that was through the growth of AmeriSuites. Back in the day, Prime owned AmeriSuites, and that was a brand they were starting. And when I joined, there were 32, and when I left, there was 110 or so. So there was a lot of growth in there. So there's a big difference between larger full service stuff and limited feature hotels. And ultimately, I was hired to be the director of operations for a company out of Cincinnati named Bryland Hotels and Vintage Golf. And we had golf courses. We had some full service hotels, some limited stuff. And so between the time I left, Weingart and Hammonds in Syracuse until I was recruited and hired within the Strand organization, there was a lot of stuff that happened in between there, and certainly learning multi-unit. Multi-unit is definitely different than running a single unit. It takes a different skill set and a really different way of looking at things. But at the end of the day, I think what it boils down to, and you've mentioned it a few times, is really leadership and putting a plan in place and executing that plan. So I was recruited from Bryland Hotels to join Strand. Actually, the real name of the company is Strand Development Company. We were and still are known as Strand Development, but at the time it was Strand Development Company, and they were looking for someone to step in and help them in a leadership role for a portfolio of hotels, knowing that the person that was in the director of operations role at the time was only going to be there a short time. And so it was an opportunity for me to move back to Charlotte. I had lived in Charlotte for about a 3 or 4 year period in between there, and really liked the area. And it was an opportunity for me to relocate back to Charlotte. And it was an opportunity I saw a lot of potential. Went through a long interview process and had some time to spend with Mr. Farr, John Farr, and really get to know the people within the Farr organization. And it was something I really wanted to do. So again, I was recruited from my role that I was in, and I took that role. And within about 8 months of joining Strand, the gentleman that was in the director of ops role before me did move on, and I was put in that role with the company. So, that was in 2006. And in August or September of 2007, I assumed the director of operations role. And from there, I was promoted into the title of Vice President of Operations, and now in my current role as the Chief Operating Officer for the company. So Strand was created to manage hotels that were being developed by a group of people led by the Farr Corporation, and specifically they had 4 Holiday Inns in Myrtle Beach. They were the large oceanfront Holiday Inn people, ran large food and beverage operations. Their bars did, $2 and $3 and $4 million a year, and all of those things. And that's what Strand was created to be the entity. They were the manager of the hospitality side of the business, and they were involved in other businesses, with their key business being Farr Yarns. And so they were a very large privately owned textile company, and they were leaders. They had partners like DuPont, help with the creation of like the fire retardant suits and all of those things. That was their main business, but they also were in the real estate business, and part of the real estate business was their hotel holdings. Mr. Farr was a young man at the time, related to the Farr folks, and he graduated from Michigan State in hospitality, and they said, well, why don't you go to Myrtle Beach and see what you can do? And he started with the company in 1970, and he's been, with the company ever since. He's currently the president and has been the president of Strand for many years now. I would say about 12 years ago, we transitioned. We dropped Strand Development Company, even though that's still our official corporate name, and kind of rebranded as Strand Hospitality Services. And the reason we did that is we even though we help on development of hotels, and we're actively involved in the real development and finding deals and procuring and all these things. That's not what our core business is or was. Our core business is hospitality, managing, and really asset managing. So we wanted to, and we were doing things for other companies like additional accounting services, internal audits. Banks were hiring us to go do property visits to see if the assets are being maintained, all of those things. We decided to really rebrand ourselves as Strand Hospitality Services, maybe 12 or 14 years ago. And we've been known and operating as Strand Hospitality since.
And how many employees of Strand are there, Jay?
So today, there's an excess of 700 employees. Today we have essentially, give or take, about 30 properties today. At one point, we had as many as 84. There were some numbers floated out there that we wanted to get to 100 hotels at one point, and let me tell you, that's not what it's all cracked up to be. We were heavy into third party management, as opposed to kind of working with our investment groups and our investors and managing for them, specifically for our parent company, which is Farr, and their assets. So we kind of lost our way a little bit, to be honest. We got so involved in all these different hotels and, quite honestly, all brands, and we really kind of lost focus for a while. And so we had to take a good hard look at ourselves, and really decided that we were going to work very closely with Marriott, and we were going to work very closely with Hilton, to some degree IHG, and pretty much everything else. That wasn't what our core business was. And so we made that transition. We were working for a REIT at one point. We had 24 locations with a REIT. That worked itself out. That went away. We really wanted to work with investment groups where our investment people could be part of their investments, and they would invest with us. And really, even though we're technically a third party operator today, we mostly operate hotels that our investment group has skin in the game. Basically, we have some third party stuff. There's no doubt. We really work with the groups that we have worked with for a lot of years.
Yeah, and so Jay, I think an interesting part of this, how would you describe the culture of Strand? So, when you think about this, the 700 plus employees you're talking about, those consist of, the corporate office in Myrtle Beach, but it also is a lot of general managers, staff, engineering, and so on down the line. It's one thing to talk about company culture when everyone's sitting in an office together. It's another thing to try to scale company culture when it's all hotels, but you have hotels, not just in Myrtle Beach now. You guys are national. How have you thought about, the Strand culture and how you scale that throughout a distributed network of hotels?
Well, Kory, man, we've put a lot of time and effort into culture. I looked at Mr. Farr, back in the day, maybe not right when I started, but certainly a couple years into the role. And, I said, John, we don't have a culture. We're doing all these things, we're running around, but who are we as a company? Where do we want to be? Do we want to be known as a good, as a favorable employer to people in the hospitality industry? What do we want to do, and how do we want to get there? So we went down the path of really starting pretty much over and starting from scratch to really ensure that we set the tone in the hotels with expectations. But beyond that, we have programs in place to ensure that, we have a set of core values. A lot of people have core values, but we literally lead with our core values. It's all over our website. It's all over stuff that we do. We actually created an app that many of our 700 plus employees participate in, where it really connects them. It talks about who we are and what we're doing, opportunities in the company, who the leadership people are, where our locations are. There's a social page on there. There's places for them to post. If they're special achievement in Dayton, Ohio at one of the locations, or a special achievement in Pensacola, Florida. That's all shared within the company through an app, through technology. So that's one way we do it. I personally host a GM leadership call once a month with all of our GMs, so that, of course, we have regionals and meetings and corporate meetings and, yearly conferences and all of those things. But I host that call specifically to talk about what's important to us right now. What does our future look like, to remind them of things that we should be doing? Topics across the board go from life safety and security to, what the hot topics are in the brands today, or what's happening with AI, or what's happening when we go to conferences. We bring all that back. But I really think that the culture starts with me, quite honestly, and it needs to be disseminated down through. And that's, look, we're in the hospitality business, right? I mean, we have to be hospitable. We have to be friendly. We have to create an environment that people want to be there. But make no mistake, it has to be done in an organized fashion. It has to be done with rules and regs, and there's a way to do it, right? We call it the Strand box. We operate every one of our locations within the same box. Sure, different brands have a few different protocols or what they want done, brand standards, but generally one of our general managers can go to any one of our hotels and step in and operate that hotel, and operate it within the Strand way. We have incentive programs in place where we do quarterly luncheons, where we recognize people for their years of service, give them extra checks and extra little things for being loyal to us. We focus a lot on what our overall turnover rate is, voluntary and involuntary. And so there's just a lot of those things that we do. We're a big sponsor and partner with St. Jude. Matter of fact, June, this is a great time. Shameless plug here, but June is one of those months that St. Jude does national fundraising, and we participate in that in all of our locations. Strand Corporate Office participates through different events. We actively raise funds in June and October every year for St. Jude. We've been a partner with them for about 10 years now, and we've raised a lot of money, and we're very, very proud of that. That's so important to give back to community and that type of thing. So a lot of our culture really falls back to the parent company, which is was Far Yarns, is now the Far Corporation. And, they had textile businesses overseas. They had them in a lot of different states here in the United States. They had thousands of employees at one time. And anybody that would watch this or is familiar with Far as an entity, or Far Yarns, would tell you that they always felt like they were treated like family. And I know that's cliche, and we don't say that necessarily within Strand, but we do want to create an environment where people can come in, understand what their role is, work hard, be promoted from within, that type of thing. Know that they're respected, and anybody in the company can pick up their phone and they can call me 24/7. I'll answer the phone, and that's the same with Mr. Farr or any other people with leadership in our company. And
That's amazing.
So that's some of it, but that's where it starts.
It's an even harder challenge than I was thinking about as you were explaining that, Jay, because we talked about trying to lead company culture with a distributed team of 700 people across, 30 or 40 hotels. But the interesting part of that is each of those hotels, none of them is the Strand hotel, right? Like, you're operating under someone else's brand, whether it's Marriott or Hilton. And so it's even a harder challenge. You talked about the Strand box, but you have to build this culture of, you work for Strands, but we're going to operate this business under the Marriott flag, which is even more of a challenge, because to the average traveler or guest, checking into a Strand property, they don't know that it's a Strand property, right? They're checking into Hilton because of their reward system or it was a convenient location. But then it's the experience that the Strand employee, starting with the front desk and so on, is how they're going to take care of that guest. That really is the living embodiment of your culture that starts with you.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And again, the brands have tremendous training platform, and there's a tremendous amount of training that all associates have to go through just per the brand. But as an example, we also within the company we have our own LMS or learning management system. It's basically a platform where we have additional training and things like that. We do once a quarter we do people that have been hired within the company or been promoted from an AGM to a GM or people that's been brought in. We do an orientation. It's a 3-day orientation here in Myrtle Beach to really make sure that they hear it from us. Here it is. It's a lot of information. It's 3 days, but this is who we are. This is what's expected. This is what's expected of you. And what you have to understand is that accountability is one of our core values, and it's probably the core value that I resonate the most with. The reality is that I'm accountable for literally everything that happens within Strand Hospitality. That's on me, right? And so I need to ensure that the people in the field in all positions know that they're being held accountable. And that can still be fun, and that can still be, but at the end of the day, we're in business. We're a for-profit business. We're not a nonprofit, and our goal, our goal is that we need to drive revenue top line, and we need to ensure that the owners are receiving a nice return on their money in the bottom line. And that's really where it starts, is top and bottom, and everything else in between. We have to take care of all that, but at the end of the day, that's we're in business to really give a return to our investors.
As one of your leadership principles, Jay, can you tell me about the 3 Ps?
Sure. People, passion, and purpose. I think that really kind of speaks for itself. But I mean, when it boils down to people. It boils down to having a purpose and having a passion for what you do. And I think there's a lot of different attributes to solid leader and leadership and people in leadership roles. We talked about listening. We talked about really kind of reading the room and understanding all that. But some of my favorite quotes, really, I'm a big Ronald Reagan fan, have been for many, many years. Whether that's popular or not popular, that's been my thing. You need to set them up for success. You need to trust your people, and it's okay if you're not the smartest guy in the room. It's okay if you learn something from somebody every day. I think that one of his best quotes was that the greatest leader is not necessarily the one that does the greatest things, but he's the one that gets the people to do the greatest things. And that's more true today than it's ever been. Really painting the picture or putting a roadmap in place for people to be successful and letting them get to that the way they want to get to it or how they need to get there is really important. And I think that's the people part of it. Again, you have to have systems and policies and all the minutia. You have to have all that to make sure your people want to work for you. We've worked really hard to make sure that our turnover rates have come way down and way under what industry standard is. And all the feedback we get shows that they like the stuff that we're doing. So that's the people part of it. Passion is just that. I mean, you have to be passionate about what you're going to, but the purpose is really to ensure that, I view it as, you can call it painting a picture or making a map or whatever you want, but really you're laying that out there. You're telling people where we are, where we want to go, and some of the way to get there, and they really have to kind of fill in the rest. And that's okay if it's not all your ideas. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's the premise behind it. But I think that's really important, and I think a lot of times, especially general managers and young general managers, they feel like they have to do everything. So they have to find a way to ensure that they're delegating and that they're giving their people clear direction and trusting that they will do the right thing because they've been given the tools to do it. So
Love that quote. I think it's super relevant to the hospitality. I mean, especially, you're leading teams of people, and to that point quote, that's a ripple effect from you down to the GM, down to the individual staff of each property.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've got, I learned early on the importance of being, again, we talked about Steve, and it's kind of, I say it regularly. I mean, Steve was a big mentor to me in this business. And, 35 plus years later, I mean, I talk to Steve a couple times a month at least. And we just talk about miscellaneous things. It doesn't even matter. But at the end of the day, the point is that we all have to be in a mentor role. And there's people within my organization. There's a gentleman, you know him, James Alcorn. I mean, James,
He's the best.
yeah, James has worked with and for me since he was 20 years old, back in Cincinnati, and he actually moved and came with Strand when I did. A few months later, I convinced him to come with the company, and he's been with us ever since. I mean, he's been with us for 19 years, I believe, something like that. Luckily for me, both of my sons has followed me into hospitality. One, my oldest son, worked for the company for a number of years, and he wanted to pursue something else, which I actually, to be honest with you, I think he's still in hospitality with another company, but it's really good that he's out experiencing something outside of just what we do, right? So he's got the opportunity to see how other people do things. He's not in the company that's being, led by his dad and all these things, right? He's got the opportunity to go out and do that. And my youngest son has now entered into hospitality. He's working for the same group that my oldest son, Brandon, is working for. And so that's been good. And so, that's another example of mentors and bringing people into the business. And, again, we have people in all walks of life. There's a gentleman that I still consider him a friend today. He was the chief maintenance engineer when we were way back in the day at Bryland. We had a variety of hotels, but one of the hotels we had was a Howard Johnson's, actually. They still existed in those days. And he was the maintenance chief. And anyway, I still, Jeff and I are close today, and he considers me a mentor in the business, and we bounce ideas off of everyone all the time, and so I think it's just really important that you have to give back, to make sure that the industry stays solid.
Absolutely. And Jay, I don't know if you ever thought about this, but your three P's, the passion, purpose, and people, hearing you talk about it, and I appreciate you sharing it. Really, this whole conversation for almost an hour, you're a hotel owner of multiple and an operator of 30, 40 hotels, and you've been in this with the same company for 20 years. You haven't spent 2 seconds talking about the beds, the structure of the hotel, the box, how nice the property is. And so what I mean by that is I really think it all comes back to the people. It's your people internally, it's your guests. I think really that's where you found your niche in the hospitality industry, whether you were cooking, assistant general manager to where you are today. It feels it's always been about the people for you.
It is, and that's and at the core, isn't that what hospitality is, right? It's people serving people.
Absolutely.
Whether it's serving them food, making the food, hospitality is wide ranging. It's the housekeepers, it's the dishwashers, and I say all the time, because I attend some of these quarterly luncheons where we recognize people that have been with us for years, and all of these programs that we do. And the one thing that I stress is that, what they do, what the housekeeper does, what the front desk person does, what the dishwasher does, is far more important in day-to-day stuff than what one of my regionals do or what I do, right? I mean, they're the ones that are in the trenches doing the work, taking care of the guests, and really creating an environment that the guest wants to come back in, and giving us the opportunity to be able to drive revenue, charge more for our rooms because we give top quality service, right? We run good. We run high quality assets, and they're the ones that make it happen. And we're simply there as, you can call it whatever you want. Call it, we're like the vessel to give them everything that they need to be able to do their job. So hospitality is people. That's what it boils down to. Everybody can have a pretty box. Everybody does. I mean, today, I don't really care if you stay at a Fairfield or a Hampton or Sure, extended stay is a little different, or a suite is a little different, but you take a Holiday Express, a Fairfield, a Hampton. I mean, the difference is who's in that building.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jay, it's a great story. Congratulations on all the success. Strand Hospitality has been a great company to partner with. We've had the opportunity to be in many of your hotels, your staff, down from the GM, down to the local level of maintenance and housekeeping are some of the nicest, best examples of culture and hospitality that we've come across. So I think that speaks volumes to the work you guys have done in the last 20 years
Yeah.
since you've been there. And it's, appreciate you sharing your story.
Well, Kory, look, we spent all this time talking about me, and not so much that how much we appreciate the partnership with you and your team, what you guys do. What you do is really tough. Working in all the different markets and making sure that the quality of work is there. So as you know, one of the things we value most is relationships, and we've had a multi-year relationship at this point, and I appreciate you asking me on, and getting some time to talk to you, share my story a little bit. But again, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you we appreciate the partnership with you and everybody within your organization.
Absolutely. It's a special thing to work with relationships like you, and that's back to hospitality, Jay. So thank you
All
for
right, man. Well, hey, I don't know why you have that Indiana helmet on your desk.
saying.
That's not good at all.
Oh, I live in Buckeye Nation, but still a Hoosier at heart.
Okay, well, good.
Thanks,
Well, I
Jay.
appreciate you having me on today.
I appreciate you doing it. Thank you.